The night had already been extraordinary at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. The air was thick with excitement, mixed with the lingering scent of popcorn and the unmistakable energy that only championship fights can create. Fight fans from all walks of life filled every seat in the massive arena, their voices creating a constant buzz that echoed off the walls. The main event had just wrapped up moments ago, and people were still on their feet, their phones held high, trying to capture every second of what had been an incredible battle. The octagon, illuminated under the bright lights, had just witnessed one of the most spectacular fights of the year. Drops of sweat still glistened on the canvas, telling the story of the war that had just unfolded. In the center of it all stood the new champion, chest heaving, a mix of emotions playing across their face, joy, disbelief, and the raw exhaustion that comes after giving everything in a championship bout. The Fighters Corner team was just beginning to celebrate, their voices barely audible over the crowd's ongoing roars. The usual post-fight routine was about to begin. Joe Rogan, the veteran commentator, was making his way toward the octagon, microphone in hand, ready to conduct the traditional winner's interview. The production crew was positioning their cameras, preparing to capture the moment when the new champion would finally speak to the world. But then something completely unexpected happened. The crowd's cheering suddenly changed its tone. Near the fighter entrance tunnel, an unusual commotion began to build. Security personnel started moving with increased urgency, their earpieces buzzing with activity. The regular flow of the event was about to take an unprecedented turn. Through the tunnel emerged a figure that nobody had expected to see that night, former President Donald Trump. He walked with his characteristic confident stride, surrounded by a mix of Secret Service agents and UFC security. His presence immediately sent shockwaves through the arena. The energy in the building shifted instantly, like a sudden change in weather. Some fans jumped to their feet, phones now redirected from the octagon to capture this surprising moment. Others started pointing and nudging their neighbors, making sure no one missed what was happening. The background music playing through the arena speakers seemed to fade into insignificance as all attention shifted to this unexpected development. Trump moved purposefully toward the octagon, his blue suit standing out among the t-shirts and casual wear of the fight crowd. Dana White, the UFC president, who had been standing near the commentary desk, quickly made his way over. Even from a distance, you could see the surprise on his face. This wasn't part of the evening's planned programming. The new champion, still catching their breath, turned to watch the approaching commotion. The Fighters Corner team exchanged confused looks, unsure of how to handle this deviation from the usual post-fight protocol. The medical staff, who had been waiting to do their standard post-fight check, stepped back, realizing this moment was about to become something much bigger than the typical championship celebration. The arena's energy continued to build, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a historic moment in the making than just another fight night. The crowd's reaction was a mix of everything: cheers, gasps, and the kind of buzz that happens when thousands of people realize they're about to witness something completely unexpected. Camera flashes increased tenfold, creating a twinkling effect throughout the arena as everyone tried to capture what was about to unfold. As Trump got closer to the octagon, his expression remained unreadable, but there was a clear purpose in his steps. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear this wasn't just a casual appearance. The typical post-fight procedures were now completely forgotten, replaced by a growing anticipation of what would happen next. Nobody in the arena, from the officials to the fans, had any idea that this night was about to become one of the most talked-about moments in UFC history. The new champion stood in the center of the octagon, still trying to process the magnitude of their victory. Their chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, and small beads of sweat, mixed with tiny spots of blood from the intense battle, trickled down their face. The fighters' hands were still wrapped in white tape, now stained from the war they'd just been through. This was supposed to be their moment, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. The fighters' team had already started their celebration, with one coach wiping tears from his eyes. He'd been with the champion since their early days, training in a small gym with broken equipment and dreams bigger than their bank accounts. Another team member held the championship belt, its gold surface gleaming under the arena lights, waiting for the perfect photo opportunity that usually follows such victories. The medical staff hovered nearby, holding their equipment, ready to check for any injuries once the post-fight interviews wrapped up. One of them kept glancing at a small cut above the champion's eye, clearly wanting to take a closer look. But something else was happening now, something that would change the entire flow of this historic evening. As Trump approached the cage, UFC officials scrambled like busy bees around a disturbed hive. You could see the confusion on their faces. This wasn't in any of their carefully planned schedules. The production team frantically waved to each other, trying to figure out which cameras should be pointing where. The cameraman who was supposed to film the winner's interview now swung his equipment around, caught between two possible shots. Dana White, the UFC president, moved quickly through the crowd gathering around the octagon. His usual confident stride now had an edge of urgency to it. He'd managed many unexpected situations in his years running the UFC, but this was something entirely new. His phone buzzed continuously in his pocket, likely flooding with messages from executives and media personnel asking what was going on. The champion's corner team exchanged worried looks. The fighter's head coach, a veteran of countless fights, whispered something to his assistant. They prepared for everything: injury, victory, defeat, but not for this. The water bottle one team member was holding remained unopened, the important post-fight hydration momentarily forgotten in the confusion. Security personnel formed a tighter circle around the octagon, their earpieces crackling with urgent communications. Some wore the standard UFC security uniforms, while others, clearly Secret Service, stood out in their dark suits and alert postures. They moved with practiced precision, creating invisible barriers and secure zones in a space usually reserved for fighters and officials. The regular post-fight procedures fell apart like a house of cards in a breeze. The octagon announcer, who'd been ready to declare the official result, stood with his microphone hanging at his side, unsure whether to continue with protocol or wait. The timekeeper's table, usually a hub of activity after a fight, fell silent as everyone watched the scene unfold. The champion's family members, seated in the front row, leaned forward in their seats. The fighter's mother gripped her husband's hand tightly, their planned celebration now mixed with uncertainty. They'd seen their child through every step of this journey, from backyard training to local competitions, and now to this championship moment that was taking an unexpected turn. Inside the octagon, the champion quickly tried to compose themselves. They straightened up despite the exhaustion, wincing slightly from the effort. The fighter's corner scrambled to wipe away excess sweat and blood, trying to make their warrior presentable for whatever was about to happen. One team member quickly offered water, which the champion waved away, eyes fixed on the approaching former president. The atmosphere in the arena shifted again, becoming even more charged with anticipation. Fans who had been heading for the exits rushed back to their seats, not wanting to miss whatever was about to happen. People who'd been checking their phones or chatting about the fight suddenly focused all their attention on the scene developing before them. The usual post-fight buzz transformed into something else entirely, the kind of electric anticipation that comes when history is about to be made. The regular rhythm of a UFC event, usually as predictable as a heartbeat, had been completely disrupted. Yet somehow, this interruption was creating a moment that everyone in the arena knew they would remember for years to come. The champion's moment had been interrupted, yes, but it was about to transform into something nobody could have predicted when the night began. The moment Trump's presence registered with the crowd, the T-Mobile Arena transformed into a sea of movement and sound. The reaction rippled through the audience like a wave, starting near the tunnel entrance and spreading rapidly throughout the entire venue. People who'd been settling back into their seats after the fight suddenly jumped to their feet, creating a domino effect of rising bodies and pointing fingers. In the lower bowl, closest to the action, a group of fight fans who'd paid top dollar for their seats pressed against the barricade, phones held high above their heads. The blue light from thousands of phone screens lit up the arena like artificial stars, everyone desperate to capture this unexpected moment. A young couple, who'd been celebrating their anniversary at the fights, grabbed each other's hands in excitement, their half-eaten boxes of popcorn forgotten at their feet. The sound in the arena swelled to a level that exceeded even the roar during the fight's biggest moments. It wasn't just cheering or booing, but a complex mixture of reactions that created an almost physical force of noise. The volume was so intense that the security teams had to switch to hand signals to communicate with each other, their earpieces overwhelmed by the wall of sound. Up in the nosebleed sections, people stood on their seats to get a better view, despite the warnings from venue staff. A father lifted his young son onto his shoulders, pointing toward the octagon, knowing they were witnessing something they'd tell stories about for years to come. The boy's wide-eyed expression reflected the magnitude of the moment, even if he didn't fully understand its significance. The regular UFC crowd regulars, easily identifiable by their well-worn event shirts and comfortable familiarity with the venue, exchanged looks of amazement. They'd seen plenty of celebrities at fights before, movie stars, musicians, athletes, but this was different. One longtime fan, who hadn't missed a Las Vegas UFC event in 10 years, kept shaking his head in disbelief, repeatedly telling his friends, "I've never seen anything like this." Near the fighter entrance, a group of international fans who'd traveled from across the world for this event broke into excited chatter in various languages. Their words might have been different, but their animated gestures and expressions told the same story. They knew they were witnessing something unprecedented in UFC history. The press row, usually a place of professional composure, erupted into frantic activity. Journalists who'd already started writing their fight reports quickly scrapped their original drafts, their fingers flying across laptop keyboards to capture this new development. Photography equipment worth thousands of dollars clicked rapidly, capturing every angle of the unfolding scene. The VIP section, filled with celebrities and high-profile guests, showed a mix of reactions. Some stood and applauded, others remained seated with expressions of surprise, while a few quickly pulled out their phones to call people who needed to know about this moment firsthand. Even these experienced celebrities, used to being the center of attention themselves, seemed caught up in the extraordinary nature of the situation. The arena staff, from concession workers to security personnel, found themselves torn between doing their jobs and watching the spectacle. A drink vendor paused mid-step, his tray of beverages temporarily forgotten as he turned to watch. The cleanup crew, who'd been preparing to start their post-event duties, stood frozen in the aisles, their equipment idle in their hands. The energy continued to build as Trump moved closer to the octagon. Each step he took seemed to increase the intensity of the crowd's reaction. The sound would surge in one section, then another, creating a rolling thunder effect throughout the arena. People who'd been strangers moments ago grabbed each other's shoulders in excitement or debated what might happen next. Some fans started impromptu chants that echoed through the building, while others tried to capture panoramic videos of the entire scene. The luxury boxes, with their tinted windows and exclusive amenities, had their doors flung open as their occupants stepped out to get a clearer view, the usual barriers of status temporarily forgotten in the excitement of the moment. Even the production team, veterans of countless sporting events, struggled to keep up with the unfolding scene. Camera operators swiveled their equipment back and forth, trying to capture both the approaching former president and the champion in the octagon, while also getting shots of the crowd's incredible reaction. The main broadcast feed switched rapidly between different angles, attempting to convey the full scope of this historic moment to viewers at home. What happened next left even veteran UFC officials speechless. Trump had reached the edge of the octagon, but instead of following the usual protocol of congratulating the champion from outside the cage, he did something no former president had ever done before. He gestured toward the cage door, his intention clear. He wanted to enter the octagon itself. The UFC staff member holding the key to the cage door looked nervously at his supervisors, unsure of how to proceed. In his 15 years working events, he'd never faced a situation quite like this. His hands trembled slightly as he waited for some kind of signal from the higher-ups. The standard procedure was clear. Only authorized personnel in the octagon after a fight. But how do you say no to a former president? Dana White, who had just reached the scene, quickly assessed the situation. You could see the wheels turning in his head as he processed this unprecedented request. He'd managed countless high-profile situations over the years, but this was entirely new territory. His usual confident demeanor showed a hint of uncertainty as he watched the scene unfold. The Secret Service agents exchanged quick glances, their earpieces buzzing with rapid communications. This wasn't part of the planned security protocol. One agent quickly spoke into his wrist microphone, while others began repositioning themselves around the octagon. Their well-rehearsed formations adapted on the fly to this unexpected development. Inside the cage, the champion's corner team huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. The head coach, a man who'd seen everything in his 30 years in the fight game, kept shaking his head in disbelief. The water bottle in his hand was still uncapped, the important post-fight hydration routine completely forgotten in the midst of this surreal moment. The medical team, who had been waiting to check on the fighter, stepped back from the cage door. One doctor still held his penlight, forgotten in his hand as he watched the scene unfold. The cup above the champion's eye, which had concerned him moments ago, now seemed like a minor detail in the grand scheme of things. The crowd's energy shifted again as they realized what was about to happen. A buzz of anticipation spread through the arena as people began to understand they were about to witness something truly historic. Phones were raised higher, camera flashes increased, and the already electric atmosphere cranked up another notch. The champion, still catching their breath from the intense fight, straightened up despite their exhaustion. You could see the mix of emotions on their face: confusion, excitement, and a touch of anxiety. This was supposed to be their moment of triumph, their time to celebrate years of hard work. Now it was transforming into something entirely different, something no fighter had experienced before. The cage door, which had seen countless fighters enter and exit, creaked slightly as it was finally opened. The sound seemed to echo through the arena, despite the crowd's noise. The UFC official who opened it stepped back, his movement almost mechanical, as if he still wasn't sure if he'd made the right decision. Trump took his first step onto the cage steps, and the arena erupted again. The metal stairs, usually just a practical piece of equipment, now felt like the steps to a historic moment. Each step he took up those stairs seemed to make the crowd grow louder, the cheers and reactions building to a crescendo. The commentary team, who had seen everything there was to see in the sport, sat in stunned silence at their desk. Their headsets, usually filled with constant communication from the production truck, had gone quiet. Everyone was simply watching, processing, trying to understand what this meant for the sport they knew so well. The fighters seated in the front row, who'd competed earlier in the night, stood up for a better view. These tough athletes, who rarely showed emotion outside the cage, couldn't hide their amazement. One fighter, still sporting an ice pack on his swollen hand, nudged his teammate and mouthed, "Are you seeing this?" The octagon, that iconic 8-sided cage that had hosted so many historic battles, was about to witness something entirely different. The bright lights that usually highlighted flying fists and spectacular kicks now illuminated a scene that would be talked about for years to come. The cage, which had always symbolized the separation between spectators and fighters, was about to host someone who had never stepped foot in it before. The moment Trump entered the octagon, time seemed to slow down. The bright arena lights reflected off his blue suit as he stepped through the cage door, creating an almost surreal scene. This wasn't just another celebrity appearance. This was something entirely different, something that would be remembered long after the night was over. The champions stood their ground in the center of the octagon, their fight shorts still damp with sweat, their hands finally beginning to stop shaking from the adrenaline of the fight. Their corner team pressed against the cage wall, making space, their usual post-fight routine completely forgotten. The fighters' breathing, which had just started to return to normal, quickened again with anticipation. Instead of the expected handshake or quick congratulations, Trump moved with purpose across the canvas. His shoes, clearly not designed for the specialized octagon surface, made a distinct sound with each step. The canvas still showed dark spots where sweat had fallen during the intense championship battle just minutes before. Each footstep seemed to echo through the now hushed arena. The Secret Service agents positioned themselves around the octagon's interior, their practiced movements somehow looking out of place in this fighter's domain. One agent touched his earpiece repeatedly, likely receiving a stream of concerned communications from his colleagues. Their usual formation had to adapt to this unusual setting, creating a security scenario they'd never trained for. What happened next left everyone stunned. Trump walked directly up to the champion, but instead of offering a handshake for the cameras, he leaned in close. The movement was so unexpected that even the veteran camera operators momentarily lost their focus. The broadcast director could be heard shouting through the crew's headsets, desperately trying to get the perfect angle of this historic moment. The champion's eyes widened as Trump began whispering something in their ear. The fighter's expression changed rapidly, surprise, then confusion, followed by something that looked like disbelief. The coach, watching from the corner, took an instinctive step forward before catching himself. Whatever was being said, it clearly wasn't the usual post-fight congratulations. The crowd, which had been roaring just moments before, fell into an unusual silence. 20,000 people, all straining to understand what they were witnessing. The only sounds were the clicking of cameras and the low hum of the arena's air conditioning system. Even the most talkative fans found themselves holding their breath, trying to catch any hint of what was being said. The champion's body language shifted as they listened. Their shoulders, which had been tense from the fight, gradually relaxed. Their hands, which had been hanging at their sides, moved slightly as if responding to whatever they were hearing. The fighter's face, still marked with small cuts and swelling from the battle, showed a range of emotions that the cameras caught in rapid succession. In the front row, the fighter's family leaned forward in their seats, trying to make sense of what was happening. The champion's mother gripped her husband's arm tighter, her expression a mix of pride and concern. They'd watched their child fight countless times, but this moment was something entirely different, something no parent could have prepared for. The commentary team, usually quick with words, sat in stunned silence. Their monitors showed multiple camera angles of the scene, but none could capture the words being exchanged. One commentator removed his headset, as if the equipment was somehow preventing him from fully comprehending what he was seeing. The other fighters, seated around the octagon, exchanged glances of amazement. These hardened athletes, who had seen everything the sport had to offer, couldn't hide their surprise. A few pulled out their phones, knowing that this moment would be something they'd want to prove they witnessed firsthand. The whispered conversation seemed to last both an eternity and just a few seconds. The champion's coach later said he checked his watch twice during those moments, but couldn't remember what time either reading showed. Time seemed to lose all meaning as everyone in the arena focused on this unexpected interaction. As Trump finally pulled back from the whispered exchange, the champion's face showed an expression that would be analyzed and discussed for months to come. Whatever had been said in those private moments had clearly left an impact. The fighter's eyes followed Trump as he stepped back, as if trying to process everything that had just happened. The champion's reaction would become one of the most replayed moments in UFC history. After the whispered exchange, they stood completely still for a moment, processing what they just heard. Then, something remarkable happened. A smile broke across their face, not the usual post-victory smile, but something different, something that carried a deeper meaning. The entire arena watched as the fighter reached for their newly won championship belt. The gold plates caught the light as they lifted it, the leather strap still warm from the battle that had earned it. But instead of raising it overhead in the traditional celebration, the champion did something completely unexpected. They turned to face the crowd, holding the belt at chest level, and began to speak. Their voice, still slightly hoarse from the fight, carried through the arena's sound system. The words that followed would be quoted and discussed for months to come. The champions spoke about their journey, about the meaning of the sport, and about a promise they were about to make. Their coach, who had been with them through countless training sessions, looked on with visible surprise, clearly not expecting what was unfolding. The medical staff, still waiting at the edge of the octagon, exchanged confused looks. One held an ice pack that was slowly melting, forgotten in his hand as he watched the scene unfold. The cut above the champion's eye, which had concerned them earlier, continued to trickle a small line of blood, but nobody moved to tend to it. Some moments are bigger than medical protocols. In the crowd, phones were raised higher, recording every second. A group of fans who had been heading for the exits rushed back to their seats. Even the cleaning crew, who had started their end-of-night routine in the upper sections, paused their work to watch. Nobody wanted to miss whatever was coming next. The champion's family in the front row sat forward in their seats, their expressions a mix of pride and confusion. They'd seen their loved one fight many times before, had witnessed countless victories and defeats, but this was different. The fighter's mother wiped tears from her eyes, though whether from the earlier victory or this new development, nobody could tell. Dana White, standing at the edge of the octagon, had his phone in his hand but wasn't looking at it, despite the constant vibration of incoming messages. His expression showed a rare moment of genuine surprise, something unusual for a man who had seen everything in the fight business. Whatever was happening wasn't in any UFC playbook. The broadcast team scrambled to capture every angle of the unfolding scene. Camera operators who had been preparing to pack up their equipment rushed back into position. The main camera focused on the champion's face, capturing every subtle change in expression, while others panned across the crowd, recording the real-time reactions of thousands of witnesses to this historic moment. As the champion continued speaking, their voice grew stronger, more confident. The exhaustion from the fight seemed to fade away, replaced by a new kind of energy. Their corner team stood absolutely still, listening intently to words they had never heard their fighter speak before. One of the trainers had tears in his eyes, though he tried to hide them. The other fighters seated around the octagon leaned forward in their seats, their own victories and defeats temporarily forgotten. These hardened athletes, who had seen everything the sport had to offer, watched with undisguised interest. A few nodded their heads in agreement with the champion's words, while others sat in stunned silence. The arena's atmosphere changed again, becoming charged with a different kind of energy. It wasn't the usual post-fight excitement, but something more profound. The crowd's reactions shifted from simple cheers to something more meaningful, the kind of response that comes when people realize they're witnessing something truly special. The social media team, positioned around the arena with their tablets and phones, frantically typed updates. They knew this moment was already going viral, spreading across the internet faster than they could track. Their screens showed notification after notification as the online world reacted to what was unfolding in real time. Within minutes of the event ending, the moment had already taken on a life of its own. As fans streamed out of the T-Mobile Arena, their conversations echoed through the hallways, everyone sharing their own version of what they just witnessed. The merchandise stands, usually winding down by this time, saw a sudden rush of people buying programs, physical proof that they were there on this historic night. The post-fight press conference was unlike any other in UFC history. Reporters who had prepared standard questions about fight strategies and future opponents found themselves completely changing direction. The small media room was packed beyond capacity, with journalists standing in the back, their phones held high to record every word. The usual sports reporters were joined by political correspondents and social media influencers, all drawn by the unprecedented nature of the event. The champion's arrival at the press conference created another wave of excitement. Still in their fight shorts and team jacket, they had barely had time to clean up. The medical staff had finally managed to tend to their cuts, and a small bandage above their eye served as a reminder of the battle they'd fought earlier. But nobody was asking about the fight anymore. All eyes were on what had happened after. Back in the arena, the cleanup crew found themselves picking up an unusual number of forgotten items: phones with dead batteries, unused food and drinks, even shoes that people had kicked off while standing on their seats for a better view. One worker found a detailed scorecard that a fan had been keeping, the final round's numbers trailing off into an excited scribble as the unexpected events unfolded. Social media exploded with activity. The UFC's official accounts saw engagement numbers that broke all previous records. Fan videos taken from different angles around the arena started surfacing, each offering a new perspective on the historic moment. The clips spread like wildfire across every platform, with millions of views accumulating within the first hour. The fighters' small hometown gym, where their journey had started years ago, suddenly found itself in the spotlight. Local news vans parked outside, hoping to talk to anyone who knew the champion before fame. The old training partners and early mentors who had witnessed the beginning of this journey were now being asked to share their stories, adding personal touches to what had become a national story. Sports analysts and commentators worked overtime, trying to put the event into perspective. Television studios rushed to set up special broadcasts, bringing in experts from both the fighting and political worlds to discuss what had happened. The usual post-fight analysis shows had to completely revamp their formats, as the actual fight now seemed almost secondary to what had followed it. Inside the champion's locker room, away from the cameras and crowd, the reality of the moment finally started to sink in. The fighter sat quietly with their team, ice packs on their joints, while their phone buzzed constantly with messages from around the world. The contents of the whispered conversation remained private, but its impact was clearly visible on the champion's face. The other fighters who had competed that night gathered in the hotel lobby, still in their post-fight clothes, unwilling to end this historic evening. They shared their perspectives on what they'd witnessed, each adding their own unique view as fellow athletes who understood the sport at its deepest level. Their conversations were punctuated by constant checks of their phones, watching as the story grew bigger with each passing hour. The next morning's newspapers would struggle to find headlines big enough to capture the magnitude of what had happened. Sports writers who had covered hundreds of fights found themselves searching for new words to describe this unprecedented event. The story appeared not just in the sports sections, but on front pages around the world, crossing the boundaries between sports, politics, and cultural history. The impact continued to ripple outward. Fighting gyms across the country reported increased interest from new students. Social media filled with throwback posts of previous UFC events as fans and historians tried to find anything comparable to what they just witnessed. But everyone seemed to agree. This was something entirely new, a moment that would be remembered as long as people talked about mixed martial arts. By the time the sun rose over Las Vegas the next morning, the story had taken on almost mythical proportions. Like all great sporting moments, it had transcended the simple facts of what had happened and become something more. A moment that people would remember not just for what they saw, but for how it made them feel, for where they were when it happened, and for knowing they had witnessed something that would never quite be repeated.